You are watching Web of Faith 2.1 and a half, presented by Father John Trujillo and Father Kenneth Briganti. We are happy you will be joining us. And now, without further ado, Father Kenneth Briganti and Father John Trujillo.
Hello, and welcome to another special edition of Web of Faith 2.1 and a half. It's our special quarantine edition. Of course, you know our regular series is on Web of Faith 2.0 on EWTN and it airs on Saturdays at 11 p.m. My name is Father Ken Briganti, and I'm the pastor here at St. Mary Magdalene's in Flemington, New Jersey, and I am joined by my illustrious colleague.
Yeah, illustrious. Yeah, I'm Father John Trujillo, the Diocese of Harrisburg, and Director of Pastoral Formation at Mount St. Mary Seminary in Emmitsburg, Maryland.
Well, and thank you for always tuning in, and questions are coming in, and so we have more from you, the viewers, today. And if you like to have a question answered and never had a chance to ask a priest or felt a little bit shy to, this is your perfect opportunity to do so. And there will be an email address where you can send your questions to, and we'll be happy to entertain them on this special edition series. So we have one right here for Father Trujillo.
Oh, for me.
And it says, thank you, Father Briganti and Father Trujillo, including Father Matthew Marinelli, for your video recording and production skills, bringing Mass to our parishioners every day. Dear Father Trujillo, my question is this. I know we should come to Holy Mass fasting, or at least 1 hour before Mass if it's necessary to eat. But what about after Mass? Is there a set time period that we must wait before eating a meal once Mass is over? God bless. Thank you, Terry Mitchell.
Well, Terry, that I have to admit, that's the first time I've ever been asked that particular question about can you eat anything after Mass? Let's start with the beginning, though. Today, as of the 1983 Code of Canon Law, and even before that, Catholics in the Latin Rite are required to fast for 1 hour before receiving Holy Communion. So it's not 1 hour before Mass, but 1 hour before receiving Holy Communion.
So let's say Mass is at 10:30. Roughly about 11 o'clock or 11:05, depending on if it's Father Trujillo's homily, it might be 11:15 or 11:20, but that's besides the point. But
anyways, I ensure people keep their fast.
You can see how you can get that whole hour and probably more in for Holy Communion time.
Okay, since you digress. So it's 1 hour computed from the time of receiving Holy Communion. Now, that does not apply if you're on medication. So someone who is hypoglycemic, diabetic, a woman who's pregnant, if they're on, the doctor says you have to eat more frequently, people in nursing homes. I know many times when we bring communion to the sick, I think the minimum that we require or suggest for someone who's sick is, if possible, 15 minutes. But again, that's not strict. But under normal circumstances, it should be an hour. Now, we might say, oh, wow, a whole hour. Well, it used to be 3 hours, and before that was from midnight on.
Yeah, I ran a retreat for priests in Ars, France, where St. John Vianney was patron, and Father Miller gave the retreat, but I was the coordinator. And we had this priest on retreat, Father Charles Connor, who was reminiscing when he was a young lad in the 1950s, how they had to fast for after midnight, and that for First Friday Masses too. And so when the kids would go to school, there would be a special First Friday breakfast for them after the Mass in the morning too. That's how strict it was back then. And then, of course, the dietary fasting changed a lot. And then now, as you mentioned today, Father.
Yes, and in the old days when it was from fasting from midnight on, that's when the old pastors, when they had a curate, the old pastors would take the first morning Mass, and then he could eat breakfast. And then the young curate got the noon Mass, which he may have been able to sleep in, but he wasn't able to eat anything. Now that they changed that, the old pastor wants to sleep in, and they give the young guy the earlier mass. But now, in terms of after you receive communion, the idea is that for at least 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes, while the sacred host is inside of you, inside your stomach, you're not
digesting it yet.
Yeah, you're not prohibited from eating anything. It would be more if you had gotten sick after mass. Obviously the gastric juices and that would start already to have a chemical reaction with the host. So I know sometimes people get a little nervous. Now, what happens sometimes in nursing homes or at the hospital, we have to be very careful, because if somebody regurgitates almost immediately, then we have to, dispose of the Blessed Sacrament reverently as much as possible. But after your mass, you can certainly go to breakfast. You can have something to drink. Now, water does not break the fast. So if you're drinking a glass of water less than an hour before communion, that's all right. It's eating food or something, a substantial liquid, like a milkshake or something like that. I know some priests are more strict and say they would not allow any liquids whatsoever other than water. But a lot of people have some
coffee
like especially if you had sinus problems. Yeah. Like I know myself and other priests, if you don't get some tea or coffee in you, you're not even able to speak that well, and obviously you need your voice to celebrate Mass. So it's an hour before communion and no requirement afterwards.
And as Father touched on it, but for those who are shut in at home and you're waiting for the priest to come to bring you Holy Communion, or a Eucharistic minister or a deacon, you do not have to fast. Because a lot of times, a priest might have 4 or 5 communion calls. And so therefore you might be on the last on the list. And then to fast all day that means you're taking medications and all sorts of things, it could be very dangerous. So if you're home and the priest or extraordinary Eucharistic minister is coming to you, you're dispensed from that fast. So I always tell that when I first get out, because they have the old idea that they have to wait until you receive communion. No, that's not the case for those who are sick and confined and shut in. And this is just an aside. It has nothing to do with communion. But for the little children that are going to be baptized, they don't fast either. Make sure that they are nicely fed before they come into church for baptism, because usually what happens is around the time of baptism, they're hungry and then they get fussy. And they get a little colicky and a little bit so you can feed them. They're not on any fasting. So feed them, a half hour before the baptism is fine. So I like to just say that, because usually 9 times out of 10 when the baby's fussing at Mass crying out, he says, Junior is a little hungry. And I said, okay. I said to myself, well, Junior didn't have to fast, you can give Junior, his milk or what have you. So just a little aside there, but I thought since we were bringing up about diet.
Oh, and it brings to mind another point. Cough drops are considered medicine. So particularly if you're at Mass and you're coughing,
that's a good point.
You are, everyone is looking at you, and this is even before the coronavirus. If you take a cough drop, you are not breaking the fast. But if you're chewing gum or eating candy, and not because you're hypoglycemic.
A shout out from 2 pastors here. Do not chew gum
in church.
Because guess where we find it? Underneath the pews.
And it looks disgusting.
Yeah, so please.
You look like a cow chewing its cud.
If you're chewing gum, spit it out in the car in a tissue or what have you. There's no need to be chewing gum in church. Sometimes Father, I don't know about you, but we'll see them munching on the gum as they're coming up on the communion line. I said, now where are they going to put that gum?
It's rude, it's crude, and you're breaking the fast.
Yeah. I'll remember a story, and Father might remember this. When we were young lads at seminarians, 1985, we were in Rome. A friend of ours was ordained by the Holy Father. And so we took the number 64 bus, right? And we were in our cassock and our clerics, what have you, and we're chewing gum on the bus. This is on the bus. And this Italian lady goes, disgraziato. I guess she never saw a priest chewing gum before. Well, that's so ingrained in my mind. I said, I never chewed gum after that, because I just thought of that woman, that Italian lady on that number 64 bus, chewing me out, so to speak, on the bus.
Pardon the pun.
Pardon the pun.
Okay, I think we have one here for you now, Father Ken. Father Briganti, Father Trujillo, Father Marinelli, thanks for the great show. What should we do if a Jewish friend invites us over for the Seder meal during the Passover? And that's from Flo.
Well, Flo, technically, it's not a religious service in a temple or whatever, although you're permitted to go to temple for a funeral and et cetera. And men will have to put the yarmulke on. That's a little beanie that you wear on your head. You're respectful of other people's religion.
If you're a man.
If you're, well, yes, if you're a man. So if you're invited over a Jewish people's home for a Passover, you certainly may participate in the meal. It's a meal, and they have ritual prayers around the meal. And you might even see, some similarities when our Blessed Lord celebrated Passover as well. And the prayers will come to mind and all that. However, the problem comes is when it is celebrated as in the churches, and not at Holy Thursday Mass or anything, so to speak, but it might be in the cafeteria and what have you. And really, that should not be. That's a very simulation of a...
It's called Communicatio in Sacris.
Sacris.
You're celebrating a non-Catholic ritual. And I know a lot of RCIA groups were big on that in the 80s.
It's okay to study it. It's okay to go to somebody's home.
Yeah.
But to formally have something like that, but we have our own customs and our own traditions and our own devotions and what have you. So, we're in the New Testament now. We don't need, you could study it, sure. You can look at videos. You can read up about it. There's interesting factoids. But we don't have to celebrate a Seder in a church, so to speak, as part of our own ritual. That's where it becomes a problem. So, Flo, if someone invites you, go to their home, because it's always done in a home anyways, for Jewish people. It's not done in a temple or a synagogue, or I should say in a synagogue. It's only in the Catholic Church that we've seen these things being done in parish settings. And I remember Father Height, who taught biblical theology and liturgy at Holy Apostle Seminary back in the 80s. He was vehemently opposed to something like that, just as what Father Trujillo said. And I think maybe that's a term, Communicatio in Sacris, that you should explain a little bit more, because it's a technical term, but it's very important because it affects this issue.
Yeah, it's the same. It would be the same principle if Father Briganti and I were to go to a Protestant church. We could go. We've gone to funerals or weddings as an observer, but we're not allowed to be the main celebrant. We're not allowed to celebrate a Protestant ritual or a non-Catholic ritual or ceremony. We can attend, but for us to be the celebrant would be violating that principle.
And if it's a wedding, we can also somehow participate a little bit in the prayers, probably not receiving the vows or anything because it's in the Protestant church, but we could be, at least be part of the
we're there
harmony.
to, out of respect,
Right.
But technically, the Protestant minister is the one who the Catholic Church recognizes as the official witness, because the bishop has a granted dispensation. So
Right.
if you see a priest and a Protestant minister at a Protestant church and it's a wedding, it's the Protestant minister whose name is going to be on the wedding license. And in the eyes of the Catholic Church, now the priest is there as a courtesy, but it may look like a tag team match. Okay. It doesn't work. And similarly, if there's a Catholic wedding in a Catholic church and there's a Protestant minister there, he's there to observe. He may participate in saying one of the prayers, but he's not the official witness.
Another thing too, at funerals, I remember a funeral of a mayor of a town who was Episcopal, high Episcopal, and all the clergy in the town went to the Episcopal for the funeral. So what we would do is dress us in cassock and surplice and maybe biretta, and just what we call tending in choir.
Yeah.
And that's called choir dress, cassock, surplice, and biretta, out of respect for the mayor of the town. And you would, maybe attend the funeral liturgy that way. But you're not celebrating, because there's nothing to concelebrate, so to speak, because the sacraments for Catholics, we don't consider their Eucharist as valid, so we do not celebrate. But it's permitted to wear a cassock, a surplice, and sometimes we wear the biretta too, with that in so to speak, in being respectful for the dignitary of the town. Or things
And
like that.
likewise, I remember when many times when bishops are installed or ordained, and they invite the ecumenical leaders of the area to come, they would not be vested as if they were concelebrating. They would be wearing their choir.
Now there was a big brouhaha down in Richmond Diocese.
That was they were gonna, or there was a plan to ordain an Episcopalian bishop. It was a female bishop, and their church was too small, and so the bishop down there offered. But again, that's where you get in the problem, is that although it would not be a Catholic ceremony,
but the Episcopal Church themselves rescinded.
They backed down, yes, because it gets confusing.
Although he was not in violation of the code, I don't think.
No, it wasn't, because he was not going to concelebrate, because obviously he couldn't. He would be there as in attendance. But likewise, if you're going to have a non-Catholic service in a Catholic church, you need to remove the Blessed Sacrament, because we want people to know that this is not a Catholic ceremony. So Catholic churches can be used with the bishop's permission under certain circumstances, but we never want to convey the message that this is an equal mutual celebration. You can have an ecumenical prayer service, but not a liturgy, because that's restricted to your particular.
And usually, like the
ritual.
Second or third week in January is the week of ecumenism, and also around Thanksgiving time is when different denominations would get together for a prayer service or a liturgy. And depending on that year, the Catholic parish is going to hold it. And usually, it's probably sung vespers, which we call evening prayer. It's not mass or anything like that, but rather it's more of part of the liturgy of the hours done that. And and
we're not even allowed to swap pulpits. I know that in the Protestant tradition,
that's what happened in Chicago.
They like to have a visiting. Like, it doesn't matter if you're Methodist, you can go to the Baptist church or the Lutheran church, and you can swap pastors, so to speak, for the weekend. From our standpoint, the homily must be given by the priest or the deacon. So even if we brought in a Protestant minister, it would only be as an observer. We can invite them to a prayer service, but the sacred liturgy itself, the homily, is restricted to the priest or to the deacon. And likewise, we would not be able to go to a Lutheran church and preach at their liturgical service.
Right. I think this was a problem in the Archdiocese of Chicago, and there was a priest there that would go to a Baptist church, and he was quite...
That was that very political guy that was out there.
And Cardinal George at the time had to tell him he couldn't do that anymore. Yeah.
Cease and desist.
Right.
Okay,
Father Trigilio, thank you for all you do for EWTN and for all of us in evangelization. I greatly appreciate your masses and your homilies and your edifying words. My question is this: what is the difference or similarity between legal and licit? I think Camille wants licidity and valid. Valid and licidity.
Although in English they're two different words, but they mean the same thing. They're synonyms. Legal and licit mean the same thing. Valid is where we make the distinction between something like a valid sacrament, means it's either real or it's not. So, for instance, when the decree of annulment comes out, that means the marriage was invalid. It never actually existed, although you may have entered it in good faith. You may have even been married by the Pope. If the decree of nullity comes about, that means that they were not husband-wife from day one. And that's why the persons are able to marry. In the eyes of the world, it's the second marriage, but in the eyes of the church, this would be their first time if that first one was declared null. Licety or legality means it's legal, that it conforms to the rubrics of the church, canon law, liturgical, but something could be illicit and still valid.
Right.
So, for instance, a priest can make up certain words as long as he says the words of consecration. Or
he forgets to put the drop of water into the chalice.
Now
for the offertory.
That is forgetting the water would be illicit. To fool with the consecration would be invalid.
Right.
He has to use wheat bread. He has to use
Unleavened.
grape wine. Now, if it's leavened bread, that would only make it illicit because in the Byzantine church, they
That's
use
true.
leavened bread. But it would be a big, big illicit. I mean, you can lose your faculties over
You mean
that
big
one.
eye?
Big eye. Big, big, big time. So it's not just a little loophole thing, but priests have to make sure. Again, we mentioned this in a previous episode. You're to say the black and do the red. If you don't do the red, those are the rubrics. Okay,
And it's called rubrics because they're written in red in every, not only in the missal, but also in the sacrament books too, like baptism and the funeral liturgies and confirmation. It's all written in red to tell you what to do and how and what is needed. So that's why it's called rubrics, ruby red. And then, of course, the black is what you actually are saying, right?
Yeah. So whether it's you always want to make sure it's both valid and licit, but the validity is the most important, because if it's not valid, it's not a sacrament. It did not exist. For instance, to be ordained a priest, you must be baptized and a male. So we can't ordain women. We cannot ordain an unbaptized person. That's an essential part of the sacrament, just like the wheat bread and the grape wine. You have to use water for baptism.
The matter.
Yes, matter, form, and intention. Now, the other aspects of the sacrament, like at a baptism, if you want to, someone asked me once if I could baptize in the backyard at the pool because they wanted a party afterwards. It would be valid, but it would be illicit. And I'd be in big trouble.
Oh my goodness!
My pension would be out the window.
We wouldn't want to go there.
Of course, it is already now with the finances. But
right. All right. Well, that was good.
Okay, we got one here for you now,
yes,
Father
yeah.
Ken.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Father Briganti, love your church. Keep up the good work. What is the difference between a bishop, archbishop, and auxiliary bishop? What's a Monsignor? And how is Monsignor Coleman doing? And this is from Helen.
Helen, Monsignor Coleman is doing much better. He really had a rocky road in his recovery. Ended up after his procedure a few times back in the hospital with a racing heart and all that. And but right now with the quarantine and all that, of course, he's recovering at Seton Hall University, and he's recovering very well. So I will pass that along, Helen, and let him know that you were asking for him. It's interesting because in Europe, they use the term Monsignore to denote the title of a bishop. So, for example, you just don't say, like in this country, hello, bishop. You would say, hello, Monsignore, or hello, Monsignor, which means my lord. In fact, in Ireland and England, that's what they refer to their bishops, my lord. So it's in this country that we use the term Monsignor to denote a special title that a priest is given. There's a paper chamberlain, and it's appointed by the Pope as a gift. There used to be 3 stages. There used to be the highest one was a PA, a protonotary apostolic, and then the other one was the
domestic prelate.
Domestic prelate, and then
papal chamberlain,
and then the papal chamberlain as well. Now it's just paper chamberlain. Yeah. Or right. But it's all paper chamberlain because paper chamberlain can only wear the black cassock with the purple buttons, whereas the domestic prelate can wear the full purple cassock, which is a little bit different color than a bishop's cassock. And a PA, protonotary apostolic, at one time, I don't think it's since the council, but before the council, could wear a mitre and have a ring that they wear for like their date of their ordination and their Christmas, Easter, and birthday, or something like that. Something very unusual. But that, of course, after the council, was not used. So a PA didn't look anything different than a domestic prelate. So, but today, any new Monsignor that's made, and they have to be in this country 65 and older, it only seems to appear, that's what Pope Francis made the general rule in there, but it appears that still in Rome, if you're working in one of the departments for 5 years, you're automatically made a Monsignor.
No matter how young you are.
Right. So it's just out in the hinterlands, sort of like throughout the world, that 65-bit and older. And it's all pretty much paper chamberlains, black cassock, purple buttons and sash that they wear. And same with the beretta would be black with a piping. They used to call that house cassocks. Okay. And when a domestic prelate or a PA was in choir, that means attending a mass or vespers or what have you, then they would wear the full purple at such a ceremony at that. Anyway, it's just an honorary title. They're still a priest. Okay. It's not an ordination or anything. So usually a Monsignor title was given, to people in a priest in the chancery office, like a vicar general, or a judicial vicar that's the head of the tribunal court, things of that nature, or an illustrious pastor who maybe paid off the debt, built the church, paid off the debt, very active in different things.
Or if your uncle was the archbishop.
Well, yes, there you go. That always works too.
I knew two priests in Erie, their uncle was the archbishop.
Right. And so, again, it's a title. Now, that's in Europe, they have more what they call canons than this type of a Monsignor. And a canon is one that is attached to a certain cathedral. Don't have to be physically there, but they are attached to a certain cathedral, and they are also attached, I guess, with the Liturgy of the Hours too, especially if they are in that area. They pray the office together. So there's the canons of St. Mary Majors in Rome and what have you. And they would wear a little bit different type of out gear. There's what they call a mozzetta, which is like a half cape over there, and a few other little accoutrements that they would have for their title as canon. But now you asked about bishops, archbishops, and auxiliary bishops. Well, auxiliary means helper, right? So an auxiliary bishop would be a bishop in a diocese, in which you would usually it's an archdiocese, right? Okay, but doesn't necessarily, because you could have an auxiliary bishop in a non-archdiocese, and an auxiliary bishop is basically a helper to the bishop, as a parochial vicar as a helper to the pastor. And he might be a vicar of a county. Okay. So like for Newark, they just made 3 new auxiliary bishops, and they all are in charge of 3 of the 4 counties. The older auxiliary bishop already was head of Essex County, but the other 3 counties didn't have them. So these new auxiliary bishops are going to be the heads of these counties. In other words, they will run whatever. It's sort of like the deaneries and all that, be responsible to them, and then this auxiliary bishop is responsible to the archbishop. An archbishop basically is head of an archdiocese. So usually they're called metropolitans, and suffragan dioceses that's are surrounding the archdiocese. So, for example, in New Jersey, where I am, with the metropolitan archdiocese is Newark, New Jersey, and then the suffragan dioceses are Paterson, Metuchen, Camden, and Trenton. Okay. And they each have their own bishop who are head in their own diocese. Now, it's more formality. Usually when they go to their ad limina visit, the archbishop is the one that is sort of like the main person of that, and calls meetings and what have you. But usually they're not supposed to interfere in the workings, day-to-day workings of a diocese.
Yeah, the only time they really get involved is if the bishop in their area, in their metropolitan area is derelict, then the archbishop, the metropolitan, is to make a report to Rome. Or if something happens, he may have to, like in the case of when the bishop in West Virginia had to step down, Archbishop Laurie from Baltimore had to take care of
that was part of his metropolitan
diocese.
Right.
But there's an interesting term you don't hear it used a lot, but it's still in existence. A coadjutor bishop is an auxiliary bishop who automatically becomes the ordinary when his boss, the bishop, retires or dies. Normally, an auxiliary does not move up any higher in authority. He stays an auxiliary bishop. But a coadjutor, de facto, as soon as his boss is
unless that auxiliary is appointed, by the Pope, to a diocese. Now, a bishop is a head of a diocese. An archbishop is a head of an archdiocese. But there can also be different congregations and dicasteries in Rome that are headed by archbishops. And another term, which you didn't ask, would be cardinals. Cardinals are sort of like, again, honorary title too. They're called princes of the church. They can vote for the Pope if they're before the age of 80. They're called the College of Cardinals. But they are in fact, bishops or archbishops. So they're not ordained a cardinal. It's a beautiful honorary
Yeah,
title.
because you can only be ordained to the diaconate, the priesthood, and the episcopacy.
Well, we are unfortunately have finished another episode.
That's why I fast.
So we'd like to thank you for tuning in always, and thank Father Matthew Marinelli, who is our producer, our editor, and our director, and also, as Father always points out,
Our sound man, yes.
Here,
Our publicist.
for putting this all together for us, so that you, the viewer who's in quarantine, can enjoy some theology on a regular basis. Also, we come to the end of the show to just remind you that, being in quarantine, our regular collections have been disrupted. So if you can just remember to send in your envelopes if you have them, either by the post or drop them off at the parish center between 10 and 1, Monday through Friday, or in the church in the basket that we usually have during adoration time. Or you can go online and go to PayPal now. You can, and a lot of our CCD parents already did PayPal to pay their tuition. So it's very easy to set that up to do your regular weekly collection by PayPal now. And then, or just plain electronic giving that we've had, or even texting. All those things are available on our website. And to just remember to keep us, always to remember us between your electric and gas bill, as Mother Angelica would say, so that this mission of St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi can continue on for another 175 years as we're come to the approaching our 175th anniversary. And so as we come to the conclusion of another great episode, we'd like to give you our priestly blessing. Know of our prayers, especially in this time. Our help is in the name of the Lord.
Who made heaven and earth.
The Lord be with you.
And with your
May
spirit.
Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Godspeed until we see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Web of Faith 2.1 and a half. Please join us again as Father John Trigilio and Father Kenneth Briganti answer more of your questions on Catholicism. Until then, God bless you and God love you.